Welcome back, everyone. So today I'm going to start off. So Simon, so have you read about the news where we have started off this whole episode, this whole season with is Kamala Harris a black or an Indian? And the big news here is really the Democratic National Convention. And so what is really, really trending is that Kamala Harris gets a nomination without really having to go through any hustle at all because she is a DEI hire. So you mentioned that earlier on, going back to the time when she was being picked by the VP as the VP, she is hired literally because she is a person of color.
Yeah, and remember when Biden was, they were doing the Democrat convention, right? Or the primary to select the one who is going to challenge Trump, and Kamala was one of the candidates to be president, and she quickly dropped out because her popularity was just so low. So according to some reports, Biden's initial choice for vice president was Amy Klobuchar, and because she was considered the most competent of the lot. And then remember the George Floyd riot happened.
Yeah, the Black Lives Matter.
Yes, and all the things. So some senior leadership in the Democrat Party began to advise Biden and say, you better pick a color vice president. And here's a very important term, color, because, we talk about is Kamala Harris really an African American black, right? That's the topic of one of our episodes. In fact, actually, the subsequent episode, we talk about the whole thing. But you can't really, we're just trying to find out the father's ancestry, right? It's not very clear from online. We know the mother came from India.
Yep.
So, and some say she has Jamaicans, descendants, and well, I guess, most people would say the African Americans, the black really come from West Africa. Maybe some of them were in Caribbean and things like that. But let's say you grow up in Caribbean, you grow up in West Africa, or you are a slave in America, you're not really the same, right? It's like saying that, the Chinese are the same, whether you are in Korea, Japan, Tibet, Singapore, or Australia. It's not the same, right?
Exactly. I mean, how can you say, I think Malaysians will understand it very, very well because we have been bombarded with the race card over and over again. Hey, you're not supposed to talk about race. You're not supposed to talk about religion. And the fact that you are differentiating us with different kind of races, the preferential treatment because we are of certain race, it's racist on its own. But the thing here is, what we are just pointing out is that, hey, it's not politically incorrect to call her what she is. I mean, her descent and things like that. So I think that's the part that people are finding it hard to have that sort of discernment to just wrap their minds around. Can we even call something for what it is? And we're not going to call out to be a racist or a bigot just because we are in this sort of situation that we are in.
And that's the whole thing that has been happening since Brexit and Donald Trump's arrival is, there's this theory, we call it the critical race theory. Basically, it's like, it's very much based on victim mindset. It's like, of course, every race, every civilization, they could argue some level of victimization. But that is a whole thing that has been empowered by the whole woke movement. Someone harmed me, I don't know, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 5,000 years ago. And it's like because of that, I'm entitled. And so that's the whole... And when we did the episode on affirmative actions, we're saying that that's exactly the whole discussion, right? Because of May 13, because under British, we were kind of disadvantaged. So, we look at, in Malaysia, for example, we have the Malay Islamic government for 2 terms under Sabri, under Muhyiddin, all the GLC, all the civil service, the top judges. The list go on and on. It's like you are in control of this country. You can't say that you are neglected. You can't.
Yeah, they are the most represented.
In terms of race. But in reality, the whole system only benefited the elite. So I think that's really, I know we sort of had wanted to talk about 31st of August and then Malaysia Day In fact, we preview talking about the states' right and things like that. That's why we kept going back to the American politics, because we just see that there are so many similarity, right? That the current elections, in fact, somebody was pointing out, because of the Democratic National Convention, DNC, that it felt so much like 2016. It felt like, oh, there's I don't know, they call Trump orange man or yellow man, I don't know, whatever color. So like boogeyman, like alien. And they just want to find someone that they can fight with. But I guess the population have become wiser after all these years, after all the control of COVID and things like that. So we want to talk about a bit on that. But coming back again to the whole Malaysia scenario, it is really, we talk about the Malay race being the dominant in terms of numbers, in terms of positioning, but they are not, as a community overall, you can still find a lot of them are in a lower income level, and they have more need in terms of education and things like that. And that kind of bring me to the point that we have to look at the whole thing as a class war. It's like those controlling the wealth, those controlling the business and power. And we talk about the Barisan Nasional regime for so many years. Then, of course, 2018 we changed. But now somehow it's a bit inconvenient to criticize them again because they're part of the unity government.
Yeah, that doesn't... I felt like it's very much like a slap to the voters' face because, I mean, on one hand, yes, we are super supportive of the Pakatan Harapan's manifesto and things like that. And I felt like the voters have somewhat compromised, just like how our Prime Minister have been pandering to just continuously wanting to get like the vote from the majority race. So in the same way, I felt like the voters, it's been split into two camps, although they are wiser now. It felt like some of them are trying to make excuses for the lack of competency that is shown in Madani's government.
And lack of reform also.
Exactly. So if you say that, because, I mean, obviously, PH still holds the majority seats. So there's going to be some form of compromise that is going to happen. That we totally understand. But the thing is, you shouldn't compromise on the set of values which the voters have voted you in. And just because you're showing... Because what you're trying to do is, on one hand, you're trying to just get rid of all the corruption. And on the other hand, you're like pandering to the group of people just because UMNO is part of your government. So I felt like that part... There is somewhat, I wouldn't say there is like voters fatigue that we experience in Malaysia, but somewhat delusional, I guess, because like lack of reform, then you just sort of keep making excuses after excuses. So I felt like that part is something that Malaysians will need to be aware of, because if we're not careful, we could end up like what is happening in the UK now. I mean, we could end up being like, hey, just sort of like lose hope on the reform that we are hoping to see, and then you get the leftist government in.
Yep.
So we don't want that for sure.
Now talk about UK elections, and now of course not this election, but remember when David Cameron won his second term and he couldn't form government outright, he had to do it with the Liberal Democrat, which was totally incompatible with the Tories, but they still work together. And I think Liberal Democrats have less than 15% in the whole coalition government, but yet they have so much say in terms of who is our cabinet minister. And people look back at Cameron's policy and basically say that, look, that's like a leftist government, which is even worse than the last few Tories governments. And it was at that time, remember, he put out the Brexit vote. And then he was thinking that, hey, a lot of people will be all for European Union. And it was to his shock and to his supporters' shock that people voted for Brexit. And after that, he resigned because he said, so he was very clear. And in that regard, he was honorable. But then we come back to Malaysia. You look at UMNO. Now, of course, you can say GPS, but GPS have their own set of agenda in terms of wanting autonomy and things like that. But when you look at UMNO, the total number of seats versus the rest of Pakatan Harapan, it is like not very proportionate. But do you feel like the Pakatan Harapan MP I mean, I don't want to call them government because you can't really split them into two. It seems like people have to adapt to UMNO more than UMNO adapting to Pakatan.
Yeah, I mean that is exactly what I felt. We are just coming out a few months shy of 2 years of this federal cabinet, and what we are seeing is that really, I felt like there is more of man pleasing than really doing their job. So in a lot of ways, it felt like, even with the increment of the salary with the civil servants, I felt like a lot of it probably came from UMNO's camp, like those sort of ideas where let's just please this. It's like almost like the same modus operandi that is being carried out by UMNO government, and now you have the same steps and hopefully you get a different kind of results, or hopefully let's just get our steady votes first, then after that we think about the rest.
Now, what do you think of this statement? And because especially after Najib, former Prime Minister Najib was removed, then of course we have COVID, and then we have different government, and then we have this unity government. Some people are beginning to say, and Zaid Ibrahim was one of the crazy people who say, well, the economy was so much better under Barisan Nasional, especially Najib, because he brings in investor and things like that. Now, of course, we are not economists. We are not here to talk about economy. But I think there is something wrong with this kind of thinking if you see that the last 40 years or 50 years of Barisan Nasional have brought us to a systemic point. Yeah, I have no doubt that, portions of 80s, portion of 90s, there was prosperity. But overall, would you agree that our nation's state of affair is due to what Barisan Nasional had done the last 40, 50 years?
Yeah, for sure. You definitely can see that there's a decline in a lot of ways. Even when we're talking about May 13, talk about the NEP. So there's generally a decline in all the social economy, across the whole different demography in Malaysia. So I don't think we are, in trying to be progressive, we're actually regressing. So in a lot of ways, we are seeing like that sort of contradiction, and people are not seeing the decline, or maybe they are like in La La Land thinking that, hey, it was better. Yes, there was certain maybe leeways in doing certain things, and maybe it was more beneficial for the businessmen in operating. But is that really good for the nation? Because we have been talking about nation building for the longest time, and even that would be, I would say, the war cry for PH as well, the nation building. Hey, let's move Malaysia, make Malaysia great again, almost like towards that pathway, the pathway towards prosperity. But what people are not willing to embrace is the hardship that comes along the way to, as we forge our way to prosperity. Because can you imagine, like, the whole nation has been in decline, and there's so many things to fix. And what are the first thing that you need to fix? Obviously you need to teach people how to fish again before we could even come to the place of, hey, everyone can learn that skill set to like make a living for themselves and even becoming prosperous. So it's really a class war that we are not seeing, because what happened with NEP is really, hey, we begin to see the division, especially to clamp down on middle class, has not been, it's super obvious in this whole thing that it's only the elites that are really, really benefiting from this whole thing. And then you begin to see that people are not able to really make a living. I was just looking at the progressive wage policy. It's so interesting because I was looking, hey, how would an engineer earn in this day if you were following the progressive wage earner? And the starting pay would have to be something like 3,008, just fresh out of the university.
You're looking at some online guide, right?
Yeah, I saw it from Malaysia, Kenya, and sort of like, okay,
so
let's
where did
just
they
play
get that
around
calculation?
I have no idea, but they did have a disclaimer that, hey, obviously this is like just a small sample selection and does not cover all the industry that there is. So obviously, they are right in that sense that you can't cover all the industry, but how can you make a policy common to across the board when you yourself say, I don't even know what every other industry is earning. So every industry has their own challenges, and just because there is inflation, should you be paid for what you think you are entitled to? I've spent hundreds of millions or hundreds of thousands in education, hence I'm entitled to this.
Yep.
But you have not even demonstrated your worth yet. And how can you make a demand just because you're a university graduate? I mean, you throw a stone, anyone is a degree holder. But what makes you set apart from the rest? I mean, can you say that I can earn more because I'm a PhD holder? Not necessarily, because you may lack of experience in certain industry, and certain industry just needs more experience. So I felt like progressive wage policy, again, is some sort of tool to divide the class even more, and eventually you're so dependent on the government that you can't. Because yes, you may increase the wage for the civil servants, and hopefully the private sector will follow through. But at the end of the day, who's going to fork out the money? I mean, when you don't have efficiency, when you don't bring in the revenue to the country, to your company even, who's going to pay for all this thing? I mean, eventually you're going to come a point where there is no incentive to work hard at all.
That's why progressive wage and also the whole civil service increment, they're somewhat linked, A while ago, I attended a course and there was this economist, and of course, at that time, I think Rafizi, they all were looking at progressive wage and they were looking at the Singapore model, okay? And this professor just kind of said it's rubbish. Why rubbish? Because because progressive wage, according to the theory, is you have to bring the average salary to a certain level, kind of like minimum wage, but different. Minimum wage is more like at a certain place, at a certain locality, you need to earn minimum just to survive. But progressive wage is like what you're supposed to have just to be able to catch up with inflation, for example. So I think it was quite right to say that Singapore model doesn't work, because Singapore, those who needed progressive wage adjustment, very, very little. I think it's less than 5,000 people, that kind of number, because their wage is already pretty high, relatively speaking. But then you come to Malaysia, and then he added this one point. He said, if you want to implement progressive wage in private sector, the government will have to force the private sector to do it. Otherwise, nobody will do it voluntarily. Now, coming back to the whole thing about inflation, and I think we talked about that in the last episode, the Musk Trump interview. I think it's worth mentioning it again. But most people, including myself, I used to think inflation is due to supply and demand, is due to price increase. But the main reason for inflation is government overspend. So my first reaction when I look at Prime Minister's announcement about this 10 billion, in fact, we don't even know the breakdown of the 10 billion. Is it 1 year? If 1 year 10 billion, I feel it's very serious. Maybe it's incremental, I don't know. We have no detail. But this is precisely the kind of exercise that raise inflation, because government is again overspending. Of course, we go back to United States. They are the pioneer. They are the leader. Quote unquote leader is really bad leadership, worldwide leadership in terms of printing money and spend beyond what they have. And I guess the rest of the world is doing so. Everyone is like having value, that's why every now and then you get bubble, right? We say the bubble had burst. Remember, we had the IT bubble, we had the subprime property bubble. I don't know what is the next bubble. People say, crypto or things like that. But everything, if your fundamental is not good, then it will happen. But anyway, that's really I know it's not easy to discuss about economy and things like that. But remember that the whole theme for what we're trying to do here is we use a few keywords we have been saying, right? We say self-determination, which of course come from the Sarawak move and things like that. But it is beyond independence. It is really, are you able to take personal responsibility for your actions? So if you want a certain lifestyle, if you go to a certain company and good bosses that can encourage entrepreneurship, they will say, you want a certain lifestyle, then you have to be prepared to put in certain effort. And so that's the whole thing about self-determination. If Sarawak wants to self-govern, they have to prove that they can govern. So that's then of course the other thing is pursuit of happiness. We kept talking about that because that is so important. and more, we are looking at domination of government. In this show, we always talk about big government. But anyway, enough of me talking. I want to ask you about one point, which is, we have this Barisan National government, right? They have a certain way of doing things. They, just pump in more money and things like that. Everything build a Petronas Tower or whatever. But then you have the Malaysian progressive, I want to call them, so maybe most of those, you'll find them in Pakatan, Harapan setup, you'll find them in NGO and things like that. So these are the people that are kind of in favor of like progressive wage and things like that. I feel like they're getting their idea from Europe, maybe from the social democrat Europe. But to me, either options are no good, Option one, go back to UMNO, Barisan National Way. Option two, look at Europe, open border and things like that. But do you think there is a third option? And that is what we have been kept on saying, right? Self-determination and things like that. But what do you say? It seems like both options are not very palatable at the moment.
Not at all. I mean, I guess it's really the sort of, I think the pathway to prosperity really, I think we find it resonating the most with Trump's slogan, Make America Great Again. So if we will have a leader that will put Malaysia first and even Malaysians first without first thinking about the race or even subsidy or even making the whole civil service bloated, then I think we're headed towards the right pathway. Because at the end of the day, I mean, people are really, really waking up because of the harsh reality that they are facing. That the inflation is really causing them a lot of pain. That people are just wanting to like, hey, what's worth now? I mean, versus what's worth 10 years ago. It's like so different, and people could barely even like, it is like 10K. Would you even consider that 10,000 a month a T20? I mean, you can hardly like have enough. But I've also seen a lot of comments on the internet where they say, that's because you choose to live in Klang Valley, but how else are you going to make that much if you're not staying in Klang Valley? So, I mean, you're not going to like come here because you want to like stay in low-cost apartment or like, I mean, people are just wanting to make a name for themselves. So in that sense, I felt like there should be a third way, which is really, really putting the interest of the nation first. So, I mean, even like subsidizing or even giving treatments to the Palestinian, is it really beneficial to us? I mean, that I felt like it's just an act of showing that, hey, I can do this just because I could. But at the end of the day, you're spending money not based on the values of all Malaysians. And a lot of Pakatan Harapan's supporters, they are not Bumi Putras, they are not Malay. So they could have a different kind of vision, values on how you could spend the money. So that sort of thing, I felt like I hope the Madani government doesn't come into that place where we begin to see kita jaga kita sort of slogan coming out again, because that's really, really not saying a good thing about the government, because that shows that they are not doing a good thing. So I felt like it's very interesting because I was coming across this article in Breitbart where it says why the values of Trump and Obama could not be further different, further apart. So Trump's vision reflects his origins. So he was born in 1946, and when America was basically the global power and with perhaps 50% of the world's GNP. So it was interesting because I think in one of the episodes we talk about where US basically get the first man on the moon. So he was 34 at the time when America landed on the moon. So I felt like, hey, there's a lot of aspiration that really comes from that era where he knew that we have seen all these things, and all these things are without open borders. All these things are putting the interests of the nation first. So if you want to have a prosperous nation, the Americans themselves will need to work hard for it. You need to really cause the nation to be like on the map, literally. So, but whereas Obama came from a place where it's like that's when diversity comes in place. So it could not be so different. So one policy is like making America great again, but the other policy is like making America diverse again. So in that sense, I felt like the progressive here in Malaysia are leaning more towards the diversity than not.
Yeah, and that's the thing. We have to define what they represent, you know. And of course, we have. And it's very interesting that the progressive are the one that come up with this DEI, right? Diversity, equity, and inclusivity. Then, of course, they are also the one that come up with ESG, equity, sustainability, and governance. And it's interesting that both have E, equity, equitable. And if we know that the history of equity is developed side by side with common law, but it's considered a superior law. It is the one that looks at the substance of the law. So that's why we have this term equitable right. You know, you sign an agreement, the share is not transferred to you yet, but you already have equitable right, and that overrides the rights, even though the share have not been transferred. So it's talking about the substance, and I just find that the progressive, of course, we know they are very much controlled by the leftists and the Marxists. They basically want to say that their way is fairer, is more equitable, and that's why open border is fairer. But how is it fairer when you jeopardize legal migrant? And Elon Musk was saying, I'm a legal migrant. And, you know, if you allow people to just come in without merit, which other nations in the world, okay, don't talk about Europe because they have done that for so long. China, you try to ask them to be open border. India, you try to ask them to be open border, or Japan or Australia. Australia is one of the most stringent border control nation on earth. Malaysia, don't talk about it. Even if you stay here for 10, 20 years, you still can't get a PR. So it's like a lot of people are securing their border, and yet everyone is demanding America open the border. Another very interesting thing that I find is a lot of people, especially those who are maybe a bit more anti-West kind of mindset, will be like, oh, we hate America and things like that. And yet, it remains the most attractive nation on earth. There are more people who wanted to get into America than any other nation on earth still today, despite all the things. They say, oh, we hate guns, we hate the riot. Hey, but everyone's still lining up. So, I mean, we are all for prosperity, right? We're all for the pursuit of happiness, but it has to pass the common sense test. And that's why maybe this is a good time for us to talk about DNC and kind of, I mean, we in fact, today we don't really have a specific topic. We wanted to talk about states and things like that. But right after we did the Elon Musk, Trump, and then DNC just finished today, I think I didn't really follow so much. I think you follow the news much more. But the contrast, like you say, couldn't be greater, right? Maybe you can highlight some of the things that happened there that kind of caught your attention.
I think one of the first things that is obviously missing is actually the fact that the former president was almost being assassinated. And
You mean mention of that?
No mention of it. I mean, it is obviously missing from the whole thing. And it's just so interesting because, I mean, here you have a super delayed response by President Biden and even former President Obama. I mean, then they say, hey, I mean, we condemn this act. And then there's no mention at all in this whole thing. So I felt like then they went full on into calling Trump racist, all those sort of name calling that you can think of. And they like just keep on bombarding on him. And what was interesting is also that Obama's, the highly favored ones, I mean, obviously, there are still mainstream media that are still hoping that Michelle Obama will be the favorite ticket. I mean, which obviously she's not.
Now, before you continue, did you... now, I know Kamala was kind of... Biden kind of threw everyone into the deep end by supporting Kamala immediately, right, after he was forced down. But did you feel like maybe... the DNC will come to some senses and nominate someone more winnable. But it seems like that boat have passed, right? So, I mean, there wasn't any of the move there. I mean, some people were still saying that it could happen, but obviously DNC ended with Kamala and her choice of VP accepting their nominations. And I think that was it.
Yeah, I mean, there's no mention at all about Biden-Harris achievement, Biden-Obama. So you would think that, hey, I mean, if you're supporting this, you would surely highlight all the achievements that they have achieved, and there's no mention of it. And the whole conversation is like super vague. The speech, you don't see any substance at all. It's
No,
just
no policy being introduced.
exactly, except abortion. That's the most passionate thing that Kamala Harris talks about. That's pretty much it. Like no other highlights that you will see. But I felt like there's another thing that they have showed, which showed the true behavior of the Democrats these days, which unfortunately is sad to see because they put the current president of the prime time. I mean, basically, when everyone is like going to sleep, only then you put him on the stage. So I felt that is super dishonorable, and that's not really American spirit as we know as it is. So I felt like the voters are really coming to that moment of having to decide.
I think it was Steve Bannon who said before he reported to prison, and he said, look, you know what happened in 2020 is you have voters who allowed Biden to be elected. And when you know that he was compromised. Now, of course, the media was super complicit. In fact, I would say the media will have to be 95% responsible. And 4 years later, the media had become worse. Much worse. In fact, they are telling outright lies. That's why so many of our episodes we kept trying to highlight how do you discern the media. But if you don't want to get out from this atmospheric mind control, you will always believe what they say. But anyway, what Bannon said was, well, now you have to see how painful it is because you elected a fraud. That they wanted to hide Biden some way if they can, but they can't. You can't just disinvite him, right? And so even when Bill Clinton came, Obama came, did you realize one thing? They did not talk about Kamala Harris at all. They couldn't. And it's like even Kamala Harris didn't really talk about herself. It's like so strange, right? You will be like, I know it's like you're not there to sell bulls or things like that. But if you are the candidate for the most important political position in the world, you want to let people know what is your plan, what you intend to do, why you should vote for me. Nothing. And so, in fact, Charlie Kirk made this observation. He said, look like, the Democrats came here for 3 days and they just want to, everything that is important to the country, like border crimes, medical freedom, which RFK, the third candidate was pushing for. What about small business, farmer, Second Amendment, the things that are important to Republicans, but also day-to-day people. And they are just content to say, look, just forget about all these things. Those are not important. They flip it. And they try to see who can believe them, who will still remain deceived. And then, of course, you look at the ratings for DNC, it was very, very bad also. Not a lot of people are tuning in. In fact, they have less people tuning in than even a fraction of Elon Musk and Donald Trump's interview. So, I don't know. I feel maybe I'm hopeful that people will begin to see the fraud. And maybe this is a good time for us to talk about what we discussed earlier, all right, the fraud of Obama. And
Exactly.
I know it's a very, I don't know what's your impression of Obama, but I remember when his name first thrown around, people kind of laugh at it because it sounded like Osama, but then he quickly made a name for himself because of his eloquence, the ability to make speeches. And for the first 1 or 2 years, he did convince a lot of people that maybe he could be a great statesman. But of course, 8 years of Obama, and then that doesn't seem like, why would Trump be elected if Obama was so great for 8 years? I mean, you ask this question, right? And before we talk about the fraud, and this is, I think, Washington Bureau Chief Editor for Breitbart, Matthew Boyd, right? And in fact, he tweeted this in 2016, and it is very interesting. He said, in 2016, I never seen anybody get in Obama's head in many years I've covered him as much as Trump has. Trump lives inside his head rent-free. And then he went to explain why, because like what you said, they were basically antitheses. What Obama represents is total opposite, polar opposite of what Trump represents, and vice versa. And I think that's okay, right? It's okay to have different political view, but at least you must be prepared to defend it. So before you come in to comment my final point, and then you can chip in, because I know you have a lot of thoughts on this. Because I guess your generation are more inspired by him, maybe.
Yeah.
The millennial, very much so. My generation, we were more the Bush, the Reagan, maybe a bit of Clinton, Tony Blair, those era. Not so much Obama. But anyway, what I was trying to say, and it's really, the performance is totally different. And now why is it? Because if Trump becomes successful in his policy, energy independent, pro-business, manufacturing, closed border, which is everything opposite what Obama stands for, and if it proves to be successful, then Obama and his legacy will be looked upon as fraud. So, I mean, this is what Matthew Boyd said, and I think many years ago, Rush Limbaugh also said the same thing, because another person that really caused Obama, Obama never responded to people, to reporter, to news people by name, except Rush Limbaugh, because he was so triggered. And that's why at DNC, he spent 1/3 or almost half of his speech attacking Trump. But anyway, what's your take on all this?
Well, I mean, honestly, to be fair, when I first heard him speaking, You're
talking about 2008.
Exactly. I mean, he is
Change we can all believe in.
Yeah, I mean...
We still remember the slogan. It was a great slogan.
It is. But it's also very interesting that Trump is also driving a different kind of change movement, which is like what you mentioned, the polar opposite of what Obama represented. So I felt it was interesting because a lot of people like me, initially, I wasn't informed that, hey, he's someone who has a lot to gain from open borders policy. So and I thought, hey, America being a nation of migrants, I mean, obviously legal migrants, I felt like, hey, I mean, they are the most accepting towards open border policy. So honestly, I thought, hey, a country with a lot of migrants equals open borders. So I mean, never in my mind would I have thought that, hey, actually it's because they control their borders well that the nation is prosperous. So I mean, obviously now that we know about this portion, but a lot of my friends, and the first remark that they make concerning Trump being elected in 2016 was that, hey, I was very surprised that a lot of middle blue collar workers, white men would vote for Trump. And I thought...
You mean your friends said they were surprised?
Yeah, they were very, very surprised. I mean, I was surprised as well. I mean, in terms of, hey, that's a very interesting remark that they made. And so that's when I began to like research a bit more. And then only then I realized, hey, just how damaging Obama's policy is to the nation. I mean, if you don't really follow the news, you wouldn't know. I mean, you just knew that he's someone who can really, really talk so eloquently. I mean, you can be charmed by his speech. And I think that's something that my generation will need to learn as well, that we are easily charmed by nice speeches.
By the appearance, by the feeling.
Exactly. I mean, everything appears to be right, but is it really right? I mean, that's the part that we have not had that sort of, I guess it comes with age, the maturity, then you begin to discern that, hey, it's not just all policy. I guess that's why we are able to come to this place where when we look at the Madani's policy and we felt like, are you sure that it's going to be beneficial? I mean, I guess we have to go through that learning process of discerning whether or not this is beneficial for the nation. So with that, I felt like I've come to that stage of going past the Obama's charm to this place of, hey, actually a lot of Trump's policy is really, really beneficial, putting first the Americans, and then if you have the capacity, you take care of other people.
You know, there's a name that was given to Obama, like, in terms of what kind of political, as in genre. So he's called the Philosopher King. and Philosopher King is like going back to Socrates, Plato. These are philosophers, right? And, a lot of people, I don't know if you met like university philosopher, you really don't know what they're talking about, because this is about theory and not practical, not very on the ground kind of thing. So Philosopher King is like this: hey, I know better than you. You better shut up and listen to me. So that's really how Obama and Gang operate. They would say very, very nicely, but when you push back, when you don't believe them, then he will start to call you out. He will start to use foul language against you. And that is exactly what happened between him and Trump, between him and Rush Limbaugh, because they call him out as a fraud. And he wasn't happy. And he's a fighter. I'll give that to him. So, but I feel like this election is going to be a great test because, hey, you really have a contrast already. And you were mentioning about blue collar worker. Traditionally, historically, these are Democrats voter. And in fact, the Democrats have a infamous, they're very proud of, they say the blue wall, right? They're talking about the manufacturing hub, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and these and Minnesota. All these are like strong, deep blue, but a lot of these are maybe in play in this election. Minnesota, they never lost before. Chicago, never lost in the last 50 years and things like that. Pennsylvania, when Trump took it in 2016, it was a shock. Wisconsin, and these are the places where you drill. You have Michigan, Detroit, the used to be the car capital of the world. Now look at Detroit, it's a ghost town. So I'm just hoping that the ordinary citizens will not look at the fluff and begin to look at the substance. If everything is Donald Trump's fault, but look at the last 20 years, 16 years are Democrat. 8 years of Obama, 5 years of Biden, and 4 years of Trump. And you're blaming everything on Trump. So, I don't know. It's just something, I guess this is a season we are hoping common sense will prevail.
Yeah, that is the same for Malaysia as well. We are putting a lot of pressure on the Madani government, and we have seen so many things prior to that is happening. And so I felt like we are in a very, very more similar than we like to think. And there's a lot definitely to learn from the United States election. And hopefully, I definitely do hope the policymakers or the research team for the policymakers in Malaysia are going to study the different kind of policies that has been put in place by the Obama administration versus the Trump administration, and see for themselves if progressive is really something that the nation wants to pursue.
Yeah, I think our time is running out already, but I just want to end with this. It seems like, at least in Malaysia, people are kind of still very wary of Trump, and I think it is because the media. For that reason, I hope Trump will get his second term, because I think with the second term, he will be able to demonstrate to the world that there is a superior way. And in fact, the first term, he already a long list of achievements, but it was derailed by COVID and things like that. So a second term, I believe, will enrich the world and help people to see, hey, common sense still prevail. We don't have to go to the globalist overload and, basically the middle class will be gone. There's just top and bottom, like ruler and serf, like the old days. But that will be maybe in a future episode we can talk about it. So I guess that's all the time we have for today. So until next time.
Yep. All right.
All right.
Bye-bye.
See you. Bye.